Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia channel. The book that this program interprets for you is called Shakespeare, which is the biography of this great British writer. If you don't know much about him, you will say, oh, he is a great writer. If you know a little bit about him, you will say, not only can he write scripts, but he can also speculate in real estate. In fact, if you can tell the point of real estate speculation, you will already be half of Shakespeare. Why do you say that? Because there are so few materials related to Shakespeare's daily life, there is even such an extreme statement in the academic circles, as Shakespeare may not know much more than the tour guide of Shakespeare's former residence. So what was the real Shakespeare like? Was he born in the aristocratic class, or in an ordinary civilian family? Why is it said that his plays were performed rather than written? What contribution did Shakespeare make to the popularization and development of English? After watching this film, I believe everyone will have a new understanding of Shakespeare. The biggest feature of this book is that the author has rummaged through history and found some traces of Shakespeare's private life. Let us go back to the era of Shakespeare's life and restore him from a symbol living in literary history to a real one. People. In fact, there are many people who study Shakespeare, so many have formed the school of Shakespeare. There is a particularly well-known unsolved case in Shakespeare, that is, did Shakespeare himself write the works? Around this issue, scholars have been divided into the Pasha faction and the Bausha faction, and they have been arguing for many years. The Shakespeare view is very discriminatory. They feel that Shakespeare's script is a very important symbol in the history of human culture. How can such an important symbol fall on the head of an ordinary person from a grassroots background? It must be matched with a person of good background, knowledge, and profound knowledge. For example, they have suggested that these scripts may have been written by Lord Bacon, who said knowledge is power, and some say that Queen Elizabeth herself wrote them. The Pasha school firmly insisted that Shakespeare was a professional writer, and neither his family background nor his life experience was an obstacle to literary creation, and he wrote the script. Why is there no answer to such a basic question? In the final analysis, it is because there are too few materials about Shakespeare's daily life. Both factions worked extraordinarily hard to find evidence to prove themselves right. For example, the story of Romeo and Juliet happened in Italy, but Shakespeare went to Italy to do field research, and came to the conclusion that only those who have traveled deeply in Italy or even lived in Italy for a period of time can write this kind of novel. Script. But Shakespeare had never been abroad, and he didn't know much Latin, so Shakespeare said, look, he didn't write the play. Anthony Burgess, a well-known writer of the Pasha school, also found many traces of Shakespeare's private life. With the materials, he wrote this biography of Shakespeare based on these materials. Burgess' status in the literary world is mainly established by his novel masterpiece A Clockwork Orange. He is also a master at writing biographies. He has written biographies of writers such as Joyce and Hemingway. Of course, the most famous of them is this Shakespeare. This book has a total of 20 chapters, and the title of each chapter is a key word, such as family, school, friends, marriage, and so on. But we re-understand Shakespeare from 6 aspects through combing this book. In the first aspect, let's take a look at Shakespeare's family background and educational background, which is the point where Shakespeare has been attacked the most. Burgess made a particularly interesting point in this book. Shakespeare was not a particularly noble person. In fact, Shakespeare's family is very interested in being an official and making a fortune. Becoming a wealthy and powerful gentry is the ultimate dream of Shakespeare's father. But here I would like to remind you that although Shakespeare loves to make money, it is precisely because of money that he does not have to worry about life and can create with peace of mind. William Shakespeare was born in Stratford, a small town near London, in 1564. His father was the owner of a glove workshop, so their house was filled with the smell of leather processing all year round. After the business was established, Shakespeare's father actively pursued his position in the political life of the town and wanted to become a country gentleman. But after focusing on political life, the family business gradually lost its focus. The development of his official career was also affected by the lack of money. This situation continued until the end of the 16th century, when Shakespeare became popular in the theatre world, and the situation of the whole family gradually improved. In that society at that time, the chain of contempt was everywhere. For example, ordinary people no longer communicate in Latin in their daily lives, but nobles still feel that not knowing Latin is equivalent to being uneducated. The most important textbook in aristocratic schools is called Basics of Grammar, which talks about the basics of Latin grammar, not the basics of English grammar. Shakespeare was a child of an ordinary family, and he went to an ordinary local school. Although it sounds like he is at the bottom of the chain of contempt, public education in the UK is developing very rapidly, and ordinary schools also require students to be familiar with the book Basic Grammar book. So although researchers believe that Shakespeare's Latin level is questionable, most of the important Latin works at that time had been translated into English, and Burgess gave us an important point here: works of art and academic works are actually two things. Shakespeare was a professional writer. He lived in an era where classical culture was admired, and he had many opportunities to come into contact with the knowledge of Yang Chen Baishuat in his daily life. Therefore, those anti-Shakespeare views based on their origin and life experience that Shakespeare could not obtain nutrition and create from Latin works are untenable. After talking about creation, let's look at another particularly well-known point in Shakespeare: real estate speculation. The book is a detailed account of Shakespeare's real estate transactions. In 1597, the 33-year-old Shakespeare bought a new house for £60. Before the complicated transfer procedures were completed, the seller was poisoned to death by his son, and the house became a haunted house. What is so amazing about Shakespeare is that he didn't think it was a problem. He even used the two warehouses of this house to store up a lot of grain early on, and then sold the grain when the crops failed, earning him a lot of money. In 1602, the 38-year-old Shakespeare bought more than 700 acres of land with £320, and bought a tithe for agricultural products with £440. This tax has a long history and is very complicated to calculate, so we will not calculate it in detail. If you want to invest, you only need to know one thing: Shakespeare is equivalent to investing a huge sum of money in a financial product with low risk and stable income. In addition, he had a lot of dividends in the London theatre at that time. At that time, Shakespeare could definitely be regarded as the kind of rich and famous gentleman in his father's dream. In the book, we can also find some traces of Shakespeare actively participating in public affairs, being good at quarreling, debt collection, and rights protection and litigation. Although these things lack detailed and vivid records, we can find some clues in his works, such as Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. Why can he write so vividly, full of market-like cunning? This is definitely not something that can be solved by reading two more classics written in Latin. Second aspect. After introducing Shakespeare's native family, let's take a look at the family he formed himself: Shakespeare's marriage and love. As a great writer of English literature, Shakespeare has produced many derivative products, and there is even a movie called Shakespeare in Love. Of course, this love history is completely fictional. In this book, Burgess gives us a more realistic and equally dramatic version. Shakespeare had already fallen in love when he was 17 or 8 years old. According to some records of the diocese at that time, Shakespeare was probably on 2 boats and dating 2 girls at the same time. In his heart he preferred a girl named Anne Whitley, but had to marry another girl also named Anne as a child. The real Mrs. Shakespeare's full name is Anne Hathaway, which is the same name as the American actress. But this Anne looks ordinary, and she is 8 years older than Shakespeare. The married life of the two of them is actually going well. Whether it is housework or investment and financial management, the two of them have a tacit understanding, but the emotional world does not seem to be particularly harmonious. Many Shakespeare scholars believe that Shakespeare's sonnets are actually written about his mistress in London, and that mistress may be a woman with darker skin, because Shakespeare wrote such a sentence: "Blackness is the essence of beauty." Today, of course, it is difficult to find hard evidence of such a lover, but Burgess restudied Shakespeare's verses and distilled a point of view. He said that William was a realist. He realized that deep down the two forces of black and white are at war, and the awareness that all women, black or white of color, possess a primordial mystery that is irresistible. This passage gives us a new understanding of women and love in Shakespeare's works. Shakespeare's wife's historical reputation mainly comes from a relatively harsh sentence in Shakespeare's will. He said that the property left to his wife is nothing but the second best bed in the house. When a person is about to die, his words are good, but the last words he left actually only give his wife a bed. Many people say that this sentence is an ironclad proof that the relationship between the husband and wife is not good. However, Burgess made a rebuttal statement. He said that according to the unwritten law at the time, Shakespeare's wife should not be less than a penny. And Shakespeare also knew that his wife had a good relationship with his daughter and son-in-law. If he died, the three of them would definitely live together in the house he left for his daughter. And the second best bed was originally where his wife fell asleep every day. If you keep the bed, you also keep your wife's position at home. So in an economic sense, this clause is not as harsh as it sounds. Then why did Shakespeare write this sentence full of reverie? We can't say whether the relationship between the two has been bad for a long time, and Shakespeare wanted to humiliate her deliberately before his death, or he was just playing a poor tongue before his death. In the third aspect, let's take a look at Shakespeare and the workplace where he struggled all his life, that is, the stage. To understand Shakespeare's works, we must first imagine a theater that is very different from our modern life. Theater audiences in the 15th and 16th centuries were very different from ours today. Now, if you were going to a play, how would you dress up? You must say that I should dress more carefully and behave more elegantly. This is a relatively elegant spiritual activity, and dramas are usually performed at night. But at that time, the public performances were all in the afternoon. In the open-air theater, the sun could shine in, and the gestures on the stage were all real swords and guns, so violent fights often occurred in the theater at that time. The auditorium below the stage was filled with laughter that was amused by pornographic jokes. Some of the audience drink alcohol, some eat fruit, and some even eat gourmet food. If we imagine the scene at that time, it may be more like a street party than a concert in a big theater. So, what was the attitude of the rulers at that time towards the theater? In fact, it is quite complicated. On the one hand, they saw that the most popular dramas about the history of England at that time were indeed particularly effective in cultivating the public's identification with the country. On the other hand, they can also feel that some folk wisdom will be accumulated during the performance, which is not very good for cultivating the cohesion of the country. Therefore, playwrights including Shakespeare know very well in their hearts that their creations are limited, and there are certain themes that cannot be touched. For example, the epidemic of the plague at that time, and everyone's fear of the fate of the country after the death of the Queen, can only be mentioned insinuatingly. But it is precisely such an unspeakable fear that makes the actors on stage and the audience off stage form a strong and tacit sense of substitution. When you go to see Shakespeare's plays, the scenes on the stage are much more terrifying than the lines, and hands and tongues are cut off at every turn. The ruler and the audience felt that it was nothing to openly stage such a horrible scene. This is because the people at that time were really worried that the Queen would be murdered by the enemies of Britain, and those in power further cultivated this sentiment carefully. Therefore, when key words such as assassination and conspiracy frequently appeared in Shakespeare's plays, the audience sat off the court. I can tacitly feel the shadows in real life, release the tension in my heart, and become crazy and happy. There was also a hiccup in the publication of Shakespeare's plays. In the business at that time, any words written for a troupe became the property of the troupe as soon as it was written, and the content was also inseparable from the performance on the stage. Some plot. After Shakespeare's plays became popular, publishers saw a business opportunity. They couldn't get Shakespeare's original manuscripts, so they sent people to sit in the theater and go and write down the whole performance in shorthand and publish it first. The shorthand draft not only violated the interests of the troupe, but more importantly, it had many mistakes. This made Shakespeare and the theater unbearable, so in 1604, the official version of Hamlet was published, which played a role in rectifying the source. Having said that, there are actually a series of irreversible differences between the performance scene full of various impromptu lines and impromptu interpretations, and the officially published text. So we must remember that Shakespeare's plays are performed, not written. Before becoming solidified and printed on paper, they have been tempered in the theater, with a certain degree of collective creation. Therefore, the Paul Shakespeare School is more inclined to put Shakespeare on the theater troupe and stage at that time to evaluate creation. The Shakespeare left on the paper gives people a feeling of being highly educated, omniscient, and omnipotent. In fact, the Shakespeare who is active in front of the stage and behind the scenes is very good at mixing meat and vegetables in his lines. Not only did he subtly feel the tense and secretive atmosphere of the theater industry at that time, but he was also very down-to-earth, taking some direct reactions of the audience during the viewing process as a source of inspiration. Therefore, Shakespeare's plays are out-and-out popular art, containing the vitality that comes from life and goes to life. This is a height that no nobles locked in their studies can ever reach. The discovery of this point gives the reason why Shakespeare is Shakespeare a particularly weighty weight. In the fourth aspect, let's take a look at Shakespeare's important contribution to English, which is why Shakespeare must be mentioned when English literature is mentioned. A basic common sense that we need to be clear is that Shakespeare did not use Middle English in his plays, but the modern English that had just been developed from Middle English at that time. As the most important promoter and founder of modern English, Shakespeare played a very important role in the development of modern English. In the book, Burgess analyzed in detail the possible influence on Shakespeare during this process, and came to such a conclusion. He said that in the era of Shakespeare's life, English was a language that had not been widely taken seriously by everyone. The local nobles would rather express their ideas in Latin, which has died out in real life, than in English. Because it is not a diplomatic language, overseas scholars think that learning English is meaningless. In Burgess' view, Shakespeare did not cultivate his love for English from English literature, because before him, there was nothing mature and worthy of love in modern English. Shakespeare's love is not because of the great authors who have written in this great language in the past, but because English is a rich public language. His own ideas were deeply rooted in the masses, so exciting changes were brewing in this nascent language. So, how much role did Shakespeare play in this upheaval? We can clearly feel it through a little bit. Among the English words we use today, many of them entered English after Shakespeare first used them, and many of them changed the original meaning or part of speech after his use. So how many words did he make up for English? It is generally accepted by academic circles that there are 1,500 to 2,000. These words were most rapidly and widely disseminated through the plays of Shakespeare. The rhetorical ability of Shakespeare's genius has given these words a unique and rich vitality from the day they were born. It cannot be overstated, therefore, that Shakespeare enhanced the expressiveness of modern English. In the fifth aspect, let's analyze the advantages of Shakespeare's plays. The most valuable thing about this book is that he regards the vitality of Shakespeare's plays as the core throughout, and we can feel the difference in Shakespeare's plays through a lot of details. For example, as we mentioned earlier, Shakespeare believes that Bacon may be the original author of Shakespeare's plays, but Burgess pointed out that the dialogue in Shakespeare's plays is usually eloquent. Until he is eloquent by another person overwhelmed by the spiel, it is over. But we can feel from the work Bacon's essays that Bacon, who was born as an aristocrat, has an elegant and restrained writing style, and the two styles are completely different. In Burgess's view, Shakespeare's true nature is clearly visible when he peels off Shakespeare's slightly pompous and eloquent surface, and sometimes he even reveals a little cute flaw. In the words of Burgess, this kind of flaw is a country youth who is determined to beat a well-trained urbanite in a game of urbanites, but he has no patience to learn all the lessons thoroughly. It's hard to imagine anyone other than Burgess talking about Shakespeare in that tone. We can almost see that a hand seemed to pass through 400 years of time, patting the shoulder of the young man named William in a small town, and that hand seemed to fall on the shoulder of each of us. One tone Burgess himself set for this biography is, to know what Shakespeare looked like, we need only look in the mirror. Genius makes us not want to be gods or animals, but to continue to be human with peace of mind. We can imagine that in the 16th century, it was impossible for only one playwright to dominate the playwright market, and there must have been many other writers. Why is it that only Shakespeare's brilliance has penetrated the times and come to us? Burgess gave his answer through the example of two competitors. He first mentioned a man named Robert Greene. This Greene is 6 years older than Shakespeare, and he is a university bully who has obtained master's degrees from Oxford and Cambridge. After Greene came to the theater world, he may have been a little out of this world. He still couldn't figure out what kind of taste the audience liked. Until 1592, when he was dying, he was already the most down-and-out writer in the history of the British publishing industry. In his last life, the whole person was immersed in resentment. Although Shakespeare has always been very kind to him, invited him to drink, lent him money and never pressed for debts, Greene still wrote an open letter to his colleagues. In this open letter, he insinuated against Shakespeare, saying, "Does he think he can match the best of you by writing a few lines of blank verse?" According to Burgess, Greene's real resentment stems from the fact that he has to admit a truth. The academic there is no way to capture the market for mass theatre, and the future of theatre seems to belong to the nouveau riche who graduated from grammar school. Another person who stands in stark contrast to Shakespeare is Ben Jonson, who is also his friend and foe. Jonson's question was the exact opposite of Greene's. Jonson really cared too much about the audience's preferences. After James I came to the throne, the popular masquerade on the market was the kind of masquerade with very mysterious and complicated choreography but very empty lines. As for this type of drama, the theme is relatively abstract, and it is often a pretentious contest between good and evil sides, and then the good side must win a big victory. At that time, in order to obtain high rewards, Jonson never missed the opportunity to show off his wisdom and knowledge in short masks. But Shakespeare was basically not involved in this wave. At most, he added a little masquerade ghost scene to his later plays. Because in Shakespeare's view, witchcraft is actually more suitable to be placed in a serious tragedy. Jonson's ending can be said to be benevolent. He caught up with the fashion and caught a fortune, but Shakespeare completed Othello and Macbeth during that time. Stand out among practitioners and become a real classic. Let's look at the sixth aspect and discuss a more profound question, which is who is the soul in Shakespeare's plays? There are many well-known characters in Shakespeare's plays, so which one is the most important? Believe that you have your own answer in your heart. Burgess' answer was quite unexpected, because he chose neither the most famous Hamlet nor the villain Sherlock, but chose to appear in Henry IV, Henry V, and The Merry Wives of Windsor. One of the three plays is called Falstaff. This Falstaff is not a particularly good person to evaluate, because when most critics evaluate this character, they tend to stop at praising Shakespeare's superb skills, but it is difficult for them to explain why this character has almost no virtue. Chin will become one of the most lovable characters in literary works. Burgess believes that the depraved humanity in Falstaff, the character mixed with rogue and wit, stands on the opposite side of emptiness, hypocrisy, and preaching. Cherishing the vitality and wisdom of the people and facing up to the flaws of human nature are in line with the emancipation of the mind and humanism advocated by the Renaissance. So Burgess regards Falstaff as the soul of Shakespeare's plays, just to emphasize these qualities with capitals and bold. Shakespeare's Falstaff has a talent for constructing something while dissolving something at the same time. For example, he is a witty person with a rascal aura, but we have to admit that this is Shakespeare's talent. It is we who lift the classical veil outside Shakespeare's scripts to feel that we modern people also like it. Key reason. From this perspective, the significance of shaping Falstaff to literature is no less than Shakespeare creating 2000 words for modern English. Burgess believes that the spirit of Shakespeare we talk about sometimes mainly refers to the spirit of Falstaff. Calling for the spirit of Falstaff is actually calling for a kind of folk spirit. In this book, Burgess talks about Shakespeare in a particularly provocative way. The tone is half-truthful, a little worldly, a little sincere, and always retains an ability to praise and doubt everything. This is the most inherited from Shakespeare by Burgess and similar English writers. Valuable legacy. Now that the main content of this book has been explained, let's summarize the key points of knowledge. First, because the first-hand materials are extremely limited, Shakespeare has always faced a fatal problem, that is, whether these works were written by Shakespeare. The core point of the inverted Shakespeare is that the most important cultural symbol in the history of human culture cannot be Shakespeare, who was born as a commoner. One of the hidden motives for writing this book is to search for traces of Shakespeare's private life and transform him from an empty and magnificent symbol into a lively and plump person. At the same time, I also hope to take a look at how the creators of plays in a specific era created and lived, and then further defend the legitimacy of Shakespeare's ownership of Shakespeare's plays. Second, during the Renaissance era, public education in Britain developed very rapidly. Even Stratford Grammar School, where Shakespeare attended, could provide him with the opportunity to read widely. Although Shakespeare's Latin attainments were not particularly strong, most Latin works had English translations at that time, And Shakespeare, who was good at observing life, lived in an era when classical culture was relatively popular, so the essence of classical culture can be obtained through different ways slowly flowed into and nourished his soul. Third, to a certain extent, Shakespeare's plays are performed rather than written, because Shakespeare's plays have been tempered long before they become fixed texts, and there is a sense of small-scale collective creation. Shakespeare on paper, on the other hand, seems to be out of touch with the environment in which he lives because he seems to be omniscient. And Shakespeare, who was active in front of the stage and behind the scenes, took the audience's reaction directly as a source of inspiration. Shakespeare's plays were the out-and-out popular art of that era, which contained a special vitality that came from the masses to the masses. Fourth, many of the English words we use now, some entered English after Shakespeare used them for the first time, and some of them changed the original meaning or part of speech after he used them. How many words did he invent for modern English? It is generally accepted by the academic circle that there are 1,500 to 2,000. These words have been widely and rapidly spread through Shakespeare's plays, and Shakespeare's genius rhetorical ability has given these words a unique vitality from the day they were born. Fifth, Shakespeare's Falstaff has a unique ability to construct something while dissolving something at the same time. He can balance extreme personalities such as depravity and wit, which is obviously Shakespeare's creative talent. We uncovered the mysterious classical veil of Shakespeare's plays feels to this day its vibrant roots. From this perspective, the significance of shaping Falstaff to literature is not necessarily less than Shakespeare's contribution to creating 2,000 words for modern English. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.